Hello, brothers and sisters. Hey, thanks for joining. I just came across another interesting story about the law in the UK. Why has the UK dropped its trial of two alleged China spies? Oh, I'm sure it must have been because we didn't have evidence, right? That would be a good reason to drop it, right? Well, let's see. Prosecutor hinted at lack of backing from Downing Street, but legal experts argue prosecution still possible. Lack of backing from Downing Street? So are we not prosecuting them because Keir Starmer doesn't want them prosecuted? Why would that be? Let's look. An extraordinary disclosure by Stephen Parkinson, the director of public prosecutions, on Tuesday evening has triggered a political over who was behind the sudden abandonment of a high-profile espionage case. Two Britons had been accused of acting as spies for China. One of them, Christopher Cash, was a parliamentary researcher for conservative backbencher Alicia Kearns, specializing in China issues. A trial had been due to start in October, but 3 weeks ago, the Crown Prosecution Service dropped proceedings with little explanation until Tuesday. So was it dropped because this person was politically connected and it was embarrassing? I would have thought Labour would be happy to embarrass the Tories. But let's read more. What did the DPP say? Parkinson revealed in a letter to two parliamentary select committees that the CPS had dropped the case because prosecutors had tried and failed to obtain a witness statement from the government stating that China posed a current threat to the national security of the UK. Without it, he said, the trial of the two men had to be abandoned. What? So let me understand this. I'm not a lawyer, but in the UK, you can only prosecute people for spying if the government says they are a threat to national security of the UK. So as long as the government doesn't say that, spy away. If Israel just happened to be spying on the UK, they're not an enemy, so that would be okay, right? Who are the enemies of the UK? This is very interesting. So, okay, now we know only enemies of the UK can actually be prosecuted for spying. This is just another one of those two-tier things. That's what it sounds like. This is complete nonsense. If somebody is spying on your country, they should be prosecuted. I don't care if it's America that's spying on the UK. If you catch American spies, you should prosecute them. They're spies. Who doesn't understand that? This just seems outrageous to me. The prosecutor did not say who failed to make the assertion sought, but the focus is on Downing Street and in particular the National Security Advisor, Jonathan Powell. It had fallen to Matthew Collins, his deputy, to give witness statements in the case, part of evidence from the government setting out the harm alleged by the spying and the wider geopolitical context. Efforts were made over many months, Parkinson said, but notwithstanding the fact that further witness statements were provided, none of these stated at the time of the offense China represented a threat to national security. He concluded when this became apparent, the case could not succeed. Again, not a lawyer. I suppose the actual British counter-espionage laws say they have to be a declared enemy or national security threat. And if the government decides not to declare that, then they get off scot-free. Tell me in the comments, is this okay? We're throwing people in jail for mean tweets. We're throwing people in jail for saying they don't want migrants in the country. We're arresting them for loving bacon and for wearing Union Jacks in public. But spying is okay. Help me make this make sense, guys. Again, I think we're living in the world of idiocracy. We must be living in a simulation. We must be. Why was it necessary to define China as an enemy? Cash, 30, and a friend, Christopher Berry, 32, a researcher based in China, were prosecuted under now repealed 1911 Official Secrets Act. To be found guilty of spying, prosecutors had to prove that a person was passing on any document or information that might be directly or indirectly useful to an enemy. Okay, that's great. So I guess I could theoretically come over and spy for the U.S., and since the U.S. is not an enemy, that would be perfectly fine. Okay, now I understand. Britain is not at war with China, but case law had expanded the legal definition to cover a potential enemy with whom we might someday be at war. That sounds perfectly reasonable to me. This was the law when Cash and Berry were charged in 24, and no problem seemed to have been raised at this stage. However, Parkinson said that case law had changed in July, and he implied that the enemy requirement had become more stringent. A clarifying rule in another spy trial of 6 Bulgarians accused of spying for Russia had concluded there is no reason in our view why the term an enemy should not include a country which represents a current threat to the national security of the UK. Legal experts argued the new ruling meant the enemy definition had been expanded and the bar to prosecution, in fact, had been lowered. Yes, it actually sounds like the prosecution service has got this backwards. They're just doing this because Keir Starmer doesn't want this person prosecuted. This is 100% two-tier prosecution again in the UK. It's just a little bit different this time. Now, is it just because they're Chinese and we can't be racially insensitive to Asians? Perhaps so. So is China a threat to UK national security? The UK's overall policy towards China seeks to strike a balance between concern about Beijing's authoritarianism and a desire to engage over trade and environmental issues. As a result, whether under Labour or Conservatives, China has been carefully described. China was labelled a systemic competitor in the UK government's integrated review in 21 and an epoch-defining and systemic challenge in 23. Labour, in a national security strategy released in June, went for geostrategic challenge. Yet when it comes to spying, the warnings have been much clearer. The former MI6 chief, Richard Moore, said China had become the single greatest priority for Foreign Intelligence Service in 21. Yeah, it's exactly the same in the U.S. The U.S. has caught China spying a lot. They've been stealing a lot of American aviation secrets. They've been stealing a lot of American naval secrets. And so China is a big threat. And it looks like the MI6 chief knew it, but for some reason, the Crown Prosecution Service didn't get the message. In October 23, Ken McCallum, the head of MI5, warned that 20,000 Britons had been approached by Chinese agents on LinkedIn in the hope of stealing industrial and technological secrets. Industrial espionage was happening at real scale, and the MI5 teams were dedicating massive amounts of covert activity by China in particular. Yeah, so if MI5 and MI6 are both giving clear warnings about the threat of Chinese spying, why aren't we prosecuting it when we catch them? Why bother? Just let them steal all the secrets if we're not going to bother prosecuting them. And I get China is becoming the next superpower, and the Labour government doesn't want to annoy them. But still, you shouldn't let them spy and steal all your stuff. What about the defendants? The spying accusation was that Cash had allegedly passed on his knowledge about the workings of Westminster to Berry, a friend he had met while teaching in China. Berry used some of the information to inform up to 34 reports that allegedly were written for Chinese intelligence, who in turn reported it to Kai Qi, a member of the country's ruling Politburo. Cash and Berry denied the charge and maintained their innocence. Cash made some public comments shortly after prosecution was abandoned, complaining of an utterly unrestrained storm of media attention in which my character was attacked and accusing critics of basing their arguments of slender facts. He has not spoken in the 3 weeks since, and he's been advised to focus on getting on with his life. Yeah, it is understood Cash's legal team argued in pre-trial proceedings that he believed he was passing on public domain information in good faith about the workings of Parliament or his own political predictions to Berry. In turn, Berry's lawyer said he was working for a corporate client based in China who wanted to break into the UK. Yeah, so I really think they both should just get their day in court. If everything that they passed on was legal, then let's let the courts decide. But if MI5 and MI6 are nervous, this definitely needs to be prosecuted. And they're obviously nervous. They arrested them. Whose fault was it that the trial did not begin? The former director of public prosecutions, Ken MacDonald, wondered if the CPS had been a bit over fussy in asking the government to make a statement in open courts, which would be embarrassing in some ways to British national interests. Keir Starmer focused on the Conservatives saying on Tuesday that alleged offending by Cash and Berry took place in 2020 and 23. They have to prosecute people on the basis of circumstance at the time of the alleged offense. And so all focus needs to be on the policy of the Tory government in place then, he said. However, the refusal to provide the additional evidence sought came under Labour. Yeah, so it may be very well that Keir Starmer just doesn't want to embarrass the Chinese. But I say embarrass away, because otherwise they're going to keep stealing our stuff. So that's what I think. I don't know if this is a big story in the UK, but I think it definitely should be prosecuted. Hopefully, they'll revisit this and do the prosecution of these two and let them get their day in court. And if they've done nothing wrong and it was public domain information, that'll come out in court and they'll be exonerated. But don't just sweep it under the rug because it's embarrassing to labor or embarrassing to the Chinese. If they're stealing, prosecute them. That's what I think. Let me know what you think. If you like this, like and subscribe. If you don't like it, don't watch it. Thanks. Bye.